These are the final recorded images of Iran's late president, Ebrahim Raisi. He's giving an interview to a woman fully covered in a hijab and abaya. At the time, neither he nor anyone else suspected a thing. Everyone assumed she was a devout Muslim. But the real shock would come much later. She was a Jew who had infiltrated the inner circle of Iran's most powerful men to uncover their secrets. Her name would soon be featured in global headlines. Catherine Perez-Shakdam. She didn't just interview Raisi, she sat face-to-face with Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. What she discovered behind closed doors left her horrified. This woman, an Israeli by origin, may go down in history as the only woman to have deceived Iran's ruling elite so completely. But who is she really? A Mossad spy? An Israeli journalist? Or simply a woman lost between ideologies, identity, and belief? The answer is just as shocking as her story. February 2017. Tehran, late afternoon. Catherine Perez-Shakdam was waiting at her hotel. A black car with no markings arrived to pick her up. Tinted windows. In the back seat, a place between two women from the IRGC. No words, just a nod. Time to go. She was dressed according to all the rules, a black abaya and hijab. Only part of her face is visible. In this appearance, she inspired complete trust. Everyone believed she was a devout Muslim, obedient, loyal, one of them. The car turned into a quiet courtyard shaded by trees. She was escorted inside. A simple reception room, a carpet, cushions, a glass of tea, saffron sugar crystals. On the walls, portraits of Khomeini and Khamenei. No gold, no fanfare, no visible armed guards. Just silence, the kind that comes before something monumental. Then he appeared. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, supreme leader of Iran, a man who doesn't meet women, especially not foreigners, and especially not women like her. He entered slowly. She was told to sit on the floor. He remained in his chair. He spoke calmly through a translator. She listened without interrupting. Everything felt surreal, as if she were watching a scene from outside her own body. He spoke to her as if she were an ally, someone he could trust more than others. He had no idea who she really was. She was Jewish, born in France, Israeli in spirit, even if she didn't fully realize it at the time. And yet he, the highest authority in the Islamic Republic, spoke to her freely, perhaps too freely. But how did she even get there? Why was a woman, a foreigner, a Jew, allowed into the inner sanctum of Iran's most powerful man? And most importantly, what did he say to her that day that she could never forget? To understand how Catherine ended up in that room, you have to go back to the very beginning of her story. Catherine Perez-Shakdam was born in Paris into a secular Jewish family. She grew up in France, but her roots were deeply tied to the tragedies of the 20th century. Her maternal grandfather had fought the Nazis during the occupation. Her paternal grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. The family carried the memory of fear, but also defiance and resilience. Still, despite this heritage, religion played no role in Catherine's childhood. Her father's side of the family carried a particularly grim history. Catherine's father, Isidro Perez, was the son of secular Jews from Spain. In the 1930s, her grandfather, Eli Perez, became a committed communist and thus landed in the crosshairs of Franco's fascist regime. The family decided to flee to British Mandate Palestine, making their way through North Africa. However, their journey was interrupted in Tunisia, which was then a French protectorate. After the fall of France, Tunisia came under the control of the Nazi-aligned Vichy government. The Perez family was arrested as Jews and interned in a Nazi concentration camp. There were no gas chambers, but the inmates were left to die of disease and starvation. One of the Perez sons died of hunger. Eli Perez was a doctor. He treated a guard who had contracted typhoid, and in return, that same guard helped the Perez family escape before they too perished. After the war, the family stayed in Tunisia. When Isidro turned 18, he moved to Paris to study. Catherine would later recall in an interview with Aish.com, "My father literally inherited the trauma of his parents. They never recovered from what they suffered. The whole family was fractured on a cellular level because of what they had gone through. My father spent his entire life denying his identity. He hated being a Jew. He did everything he could to change his accent and to become as French as he could. For him, Judaism was literally a plague." While Catherine's mother was fairly comfortable with her secular Jewish identity, her father was not only secular, he was deeply anti-Semitic in the sense that he despised himself and everything connected to Judaism and Israel. The story on her mother's side followed a different path. Her ancestors had lived for generations as Jews in southern France. Her maternal grandfather, Jean-Baptiste Lévy, recognized in the 1930s the growing threat of anti-Semitism. He had his entire family convert to Christianity and changed the family name from Lévy to Laval. Although the Nazis didn't recognize such conversions, living under the Vichy regime in southern France allowed the family to survive. Jean-Baptiste joined the French resistance. He was captured twice and managed to escape both times, returning to fight again. After the war, he was awarded France's highest military honor. The Lavals resumed their Jewish identity after the war, but it was a tenuous identity, disconnected from tradition and practice, like a cut flower with no roots. When Catherine was 11 years old, her mother died. She was left with her father, a man who had long rejected his own people. "I was raised very, very secular," she would later say. "It wasn't that I was cut out of the Jewish community, but I had no sense of religious belonging. I never grew up with a sense of Jewish identity." School, books, music, Paris, everything that filled her youth had nothing to do with Judaism, synagogues, or Shabbat. Her Jewishness was more like background noise, unspoken, barely visible. She accepted it, but it wasn't part of how she saw herself. She was just a smart, curious girl from a good family. But true detachment came later, after she moved to London. Catherine was accepted to the London School of Economics. There, among students from around the world, she encountered something very different from the Parisian life she was accustomed to. In 1999, she met a man who would change her future, a Muslim from Yemen named Faris. He was charismatic, confident, and devout. His background didn't scare her, it fascinated her. They married just 6 months later. She was not yet 19. She converted to Islam, not out of deep conviction, but more as a gesture of compromise, to gain her new family's acceptance. But that compromise would soon lead her into something far more serious. "I never spoke about my heritage ever because I knew that if I mentioned it, I would get bullied into silence, so I just stopped mentioning it." At first, she simply adapted. But over time, she began to lose herself. Her Jewish background became a source of tension with her husband's family. They never fully accepted her, and the pressure to conform was constant. She gradually faded into the background, trying not to provoke their discomfort. Her life with Faris took her to Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. There, she found herself in a deeply conservative society, patriarchal, restrictive, foreign. For a girl raised in secular Paris, it was like stepping into another century. Still, she tried to belong. She began writing, initially about Yemen, then expanding to broader topics in the Middle East. Working remotely, she contributed to international outlets. Her name began appearing in articles read in Tehran, Moscow, and various Arab capitals. This marked the beginning of her path as a political analyst, quietly from the sidelines of someone else's war. Meanwhile, something inside her shifted. Though her husband was a Sunni Muslim, she felt increasingly drawn to Shi'ism, Islam's second major branch. She became interested in its philosophy, its view of martyrdom, and the figure of Imam Hussein, grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, who was killed at Karbala. Every year, millions of Shia pilgrims walk to Karbala in Iraq for Arba'in, the anniversary of Hussein's death. In one of her later videos, Catherine described it emotionally. "It's 20 million people walking, not because they have to, not out of religious duty, but out of love for this one imam that means everything to them." For her, Shi'ism offered not just a belief system, it offered meaning, or at least it seemed to. She studied, wrote, immersed herself in the history, met with Shia scholars, and began publishing books and articles defending Shia Islam. But her marriage was falling apart. Her Jewish roots and intellectual independence clashed with her husband's expectations. By 2014, the relationship had broken down. She filed for divorce and was left alone, raising 2 children. No country, no community, no clear identity. And yet, this was the turning point, the beginning of a journey that would eventually take her into Iranian newsrooms and then into the private audience of Iran's supreme leader himself. To understand how a Jewish woman ended up in the inner sanctum of the Islamic Republic, one must first understand this. For many years, she didn't even know who she was herself. After her divorce in 2014, Catherine Perez-Shakdam's life took a sharp turn. Left alone with 2 children, she didn't return to Judaism. Instead, she dove even deeper into Shiite Islam and, as she would later admit, into her own confusion. This marked a new chapter in her life, working with Iranian media. It snowballed really quickly. Iran is so starved for Western support that they'll talk to anyone with a Western passport, she would later say. Catherine began collaborating with Press TV, Tehran Times, Mir News, and other outlets affiliated with the regime. Her articles were published in English, and as a Western political analyst, she explained to the world why Iran was supposedly right. She was introduced as an expert on terrorism, a Middle East analyst, and was invited to conferences. But deep down, she was beginning to feel conflicted. As she would later admit, "I was aware that Iranian media was attempting to draft me into a propaganda machine, and to a certain extent, I played along. She wasn't paid, but doors opened, and more importantly, she was given access. She became one of them. And all of this in a country where Jews are treated as enemies of Islam, where a woman of Jewish descent would never be allowed near the centers of power, but no one knew. Her background remained hidden." In 2017, she traveled to Tehran to attend a major conference on the Palestinian cause. She wasn't treated like a guest, she felt at home. She was granted access to an event where Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, gave a fiery speech. In that room sat people like Hamas leader Khalid Mashal and General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force. None of them knew that the woman in the veil, sitting quietly among them, had been born into a Jewish family in Paris. A woman who once buried her identity just to enter their world. Later, appearing on Iranian state television, she said what they wanted to hear. With Hamas stands the idea of resistance against oppression, and I think it's very important today. I think that Israel fails to understand that it has nothing to do with politics per se, but more to do with an idea or philosophy that people were born free. Her words sounded like music to Iranian officials. A woman who converted to Islam, praising Shiite resistance. She was the perfect symbol, and no one even tried to ask, who is she really? Iran's propaganda machine adored people like her. Catherine became a figure they could use. But behind the veil and the rhetoric, a very different story was unfolding. Soon she would be offered an exclusive interview with a man who would later become the president of Iran, Ebrahim Raisi. May 2017. Just hours before Iran's presidential elections, Catherine Perez-Shakdam was traveling with Ebrahim Raisi on his campaign trail from Tehran to Rasht. Some low-level official didn't invite her. Her access came through one of the Islamic Revolution's top propagandists, a man, ironically, educated in the United States. He vouched for her moral character, and that was all it took. Suddenly, she had something most Western journalists could only dream of: a one-on-one interview with the man tipped to become Iran's next president. In Iran, foreign access to presidential candidates is almost unheard of, especially right before elections. But Catherine wasn't treated like an outsider. She was seen as one of them, a French citizen, previously married to a Muslim man from Yemen. She wore a hijab, she spoke like a devout Shia. She'd written scathing pieces about Saudi Arabia. She denounced Zionism. On paper, she was perfect. Raisi spoke calmly, deliberately, without theatrics. He wanted to appear moderate and rational. He talked about the importance of respecting national sovereignty, about rejecting military interventions, about diplomacy. But Catherine pressed him. What about Iran's involvement in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon? Raisi didn't flinch. We don't intervene. We act as a moral power. We have a duty to protect the innocent, from the West, from Sunni extremism, from Saudi Arabia. He was clear. Iran's ideology wasn't just national. It was universal. Iran sees itself not as an aggressor, but as a liberator. It believes it has a divine mission to export Islamic justice far beyond its borders. That, he explained, is the foundation of their system, velayat-e faqih, the rule of Islamic jurists. Catherine also asked about Iran's nuclear program. Of course, that question didn't make it into the official transcript. Too sensitive. But in private, between the lines, Raisi gave her an answer. Iran has every right to pursue nuclear development. It's a matter of sovereignty. No one can dictate terms to us. And what our leadership chooses to do with that power is Iran's decision alone. He didn't make threats. He didn't raise his voice. But behind his words was force, strategic calculation. He spoke like someone who understood how to play both sides, say the right things to the West, while maintaining dominance at home. Raisi was not just a candidate. Even then, he controlled billions through the Aston Quds Foundation. He had his own private security force. People called him the Lord of Mashhad. His rise to the presidency wasn't a surprise. It was a plan. Catherine heard it firsthand from his team. He'll lose these elections, but he'll come back in 4 years and win. That's the strategy. He's Tehran's guy. It's better to keep him close, because if he turns against us, he could cause real damage. She didn't just see a politician, she saw a project, a future ruler of a country not satisfied with defense, but hungry for regional dominance. And if she once doubted how serious Iran's ambitions were, that day erased all doubt. I used to think Israel was overreacting to Iran's nuclear goals, she would later admit. I don't believe that anymore. The threat is real, and men like Raisi understand the pressure such power can place on their neighbors. Their conversation ended like any other interview. Officially, it was just another piece of journalism. But unofficially, it was a rare glimpse into the heart of a regime that dresses its ambitions in moral language, but dreams only of power. Of all her trips to Iran, one meeting stood out above all the rest. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. A man above the president, the government, and even the military. He had ruled for more than 30 years. They called him the representative of God on earth. And one day, Catherine found herself face to face with him. They were alone in a room behind closed doors. Khamenei started with some casual small talk, trying to put her at ease. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, high-pitched, delicate. But within minutes, the tone shifted. He began speaking about the end of days, about how he, Khamenei, would be the one to usher in the return of the Mahdi, the messianic figure in Shiite Islam. He spoke of a great war that Iran would lead, about the need to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem for the Mahdi to return and save humanity. He framed the wars in Yemen and Syria as part of a divine mission. He said he had a sacred duty, a purpose higher than politics or borders. And he claimed, shockingly, that even killing innocent people could be justified if they were enemies of God. He doesn't care about his country, Catherine later said. He would literally watch it burn if it meant Islam would triumph. And yet he had no idea who he was speaking to. A woman? A Jew? A French citizen? Everything he considered an enemy. But he didn't know. Or maybe he knew, and chose not to believe. They weren't sure about me at first, she would say. They had no idea I was Jewish, but eventually they decided I would be a perfect person to convey their perspective, to win new recruits to their cause. He spoke with her for half an hour. Then, without warning, he stood up and left. No farewell, no signal that the conversation had ended. Just gone. She sat in silence for a few moments, surrounded by guards and stone walls, her fear palpable. Then she got back in the car and drove away, dazed, shaken. What just happened, she thought. That meeting changed everything. What she had witnessed wasn't just a man, it was an ideology. One that Khamenei, Raisi, and Soleimani all embraced. One that, in her words, was as terrifying as Hitler's Mein Kampf. When she returned to London, she contacted British authorities. Not because she was a spy. She didn't have intel, but she had understanding. She had seen how the system worked from within, how it recruited, how it was manipulated, and why. She credited her courage to her grandfather, a member of the French resistance during World War II. But that day, sitting across from Iran's supreme leader, everything in her life, her upbringing, her faith, her choices, came into focus. And she knew she could never again be part of the game. When Catherine returned from Iran, she was no longer the woman who had arrived there wearing a hijab. The shock of what she saw and heard, the hypocrisy, the cruelty masked as religious rhetoric, left a lasting impact. Her faith in Islam had shattered. She removed the hijab, abandoned all religious practices, and for the first time in many years, allowed herself to remember who she truly was: a Jew. Not a believer, but someone aware of her roots. She came to understand that her years of self-denial and desire to blend in were merely an attempt to escape her own identity. Her daughter played a major role in this awakening. Raised in the shadow of the Islamic world, the girl unexpectedly began to show interest in Israel, watching videos and reading articles. One day, she asked her mother a direct question. Why is it that when people say bad things about Israel, you agree, but when they say bad things about Jews, you get angry? That question changed everything. Catherine admitted she had simply been afraid of being herself, afraid of being judged, rejected. But thanks to her daughter, she began to see the world in a different light. She started reading, thinking, and reevaluating, and she realized she no longer wanted to live a lie. Her past was a part of her, and she didn't need to erase it to win approval from those who would never truly accept her anyway. When the truth about her background became public, panic spread within Iran. Telegram channels close to former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad claimed that a Mossad agent had infiltrated the highest levels of government. All articles and interviews bearing her name were scrubbed from official websites. State media declared they had never worked with her. Her name was erased. Years later, Catherine would write that she had long felt discomfort with Islam's treatment of women. She added that during her time in Iran, she avoided arguments and never revealed her true motivations. She simply listened. Today, Catherine lives in London. She writes articles, gives interviews, and tries to warn the West about the real threat posed by the regime's ideology. She openly calls for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to be designated as a terrorist organization. She compares the rhetoric she heard from Iranian leaders to Mein Kampf and says, if we are serious about combating terrorism and Islamic radicalism and stand by the rule of law, we have to prescribe the IRGC. But her story also draws skepticism. Under her BBC interview, YouTube users leave comments like, "Oh my God, every time I listen to any interview with Catherine Perez-Shakdam, I find many contradictions, or dishonesty maybe." To me, she was definitely an agent for Israel with an amazing cover story or construct which the Iranian establishment could not detect. She's all over the place. She believed, but she didn't. She was a Trojan horse, but she wasn't. She was telling the truth, but now she thinks she was wrong but doesn't explain what she was wrong about or why. She was Shia, Sunni, Jewish, atheist, married to a Sunni, had kids. Catherine herself admits her journey has been confusing, contradictory, and difficult. But she believes that now, finally, she's telling the truth. And what do you think? Who was Catherine Perez-Shakdam really? A lost soul searching for faith? An intellectual trapped in ideology? An agent on a secret mission? Or just a woman who spent too long pretending to be someone else until she finally remembered who she really was? Share your thoughts in the comments. And as always, don't forget to leave a like. Thanks for watching.